so we can't live, the way we want to, that's not conformed to the way God has designed, for us to live. And so that's redemption. And so if we go into the resurrection, people may say, yeah, well, the resurrection is when Jesus had rose up from the dead. And yes, that's true. But resurrection can be spiritual as well, because it's a revival from death, right? And so when we look at this woman, when we look at the Samaritan woman, when she came to Jesus, one thing that I always say is that if you don't got God in your life, if you walk in this world and you don't have God, you don't have life. When you're walking in this world, you're dead without him. And so when we look at her, she didn't have God. I'm pretty sure she believed in God because she said that we're waiting on the Messiah and stuff. So it showed that, she did know about God and she did hear about him. But can we say, was she living and with, having God in her life? And the reason why I say that is because when she had the encounter with God and God said, I can give you what you're looking for, it shows there was something missing in her life. And it shows maybe she didn't have God fully in her life the way she should have had, right? And so resurrection can be spiritual. We can be revived from spiritual death, where God comes into our life and he places all things new. Because it's like the word says in Corinthians, and I think it's in 1st or 2nd Corinthians, where it says that things through Adam are all dead, but through Christ is alive. So that's how important it is to have God in our life. And so that is the resurrection. And those aspects that I was bringing, that is what is conformed to Jesus here, the symbol of Jesus, what we can see that he's presenting here, right? That's what I was able to pull out. And so when we look at the Samaritan woman, okay, we see that she's coming to the well, and what is she doing? She's refilling because she's thirsty, But if we think about it here, when we all came to Christ, we all came like that. We was all thirsty at one point in our lives. We were all looking for something. Okay, and so I wanted to define some characteristics of the Samaritan woman behind her refilling for her thirst. And so as I was reading, and I was able to see for myself, she wasn't satisfied. If you can drink one, when you're thirsty and you drink water and you're like, okay, it's good in the moment, and then like an hour later you're thirsty again. You wasn't satisfied with that first cup. But if we look at it spiritual, we're not always satisfied with the things that we do. We're not always satisfied with how we live or what we're looking for. We're always desperate. And here she was desperate. She needed another jar of water. How many of you have came to Christ where you yourself was desperate? Where you have told Christ, I'm looking and I'm searching, because that's what we can see here. She was seeking for something. She was looking for something to satisfy her needs. We're never satisfied with anything that we do. And we can say that with sin. If we think about sin, in the moment, your flesh is asking for it and it feels good in the moment. But then when you do it and you're done, it lasts for a second, and then you're back at it again to not being satisfied, and you're looking for something else. And that's how it is with us. When we have come to Christ, we wasn't satisfied, but until we come to him, he can provide to you all the things that you need to satisfy you, to complete you. And so that's what we're able to see with the Samaritan woman, refilling that thirst. So also when I was reading the story, I was able to look at it as she had one way of thinking, one-minded way, where, like I was saying, she heard of God and things like that, and she's like, heard about the Messiah and things like that, but we see how her mind was. Sometimes when we come to Christ, we're very ignorant, we're very naive. And when we come to Christ and we have encounters, we don't know how to go about on those encounters. Like here, she had an encounter with Christ. Most beautiful thing ever is to have an encounter with God. She had that encounter of Christ, and as you see, you're able to see in the form that her mind was thinking, where she told Jesus, she's like, you're asking me for water, but you're a Jew, and so we can see a symbolism behind that of her mind, and how when she was saying that she's waiting for the Messiah to come. But it also shows how there's a division there in between the Jews and the Samaritans. And so from there, I do want to speak about where the well comes in for that, the Jacob's well. So in the Bible, it says that the well that they were at were Jacob's well, right? I was doing a little research on it, and from the research that I have found, very short and simple, we know that the well represents Jacob, but here we know that Jesus is greater than Jacob. That's why when the woman says, I don't know if it was the woman. Oh, well, yeah, I think it was the woman when she told him, "Are you greater than our father Jacob?" And so Jesus represents, the groom who's coming, how he is greater than Jacob. And it also represents how Jesus was trying to do a reconciliation of like the descendants of Jacob, bringing them together, because there was a division here. And so the Lord was trying to bring everyone together, not being separated and stuff. And so when I was doing the research, they were saying that it basically symbolized that Jesus was bringing the descendants back together, because they were all split up apart and all divided. And so that's the symbolism for the well there. Now, when we think about the water, like I told you guys, the water also represents the Spirit. We also was saying, about Jesus and stuff. But if we think about it, the water can also represent worship. Because as we're reading, it spoke about worship a lot. When Jesus was talking about the Spirit and the truth, he also spoke about worship. Let me read it for you guys, because I don't want to. In verse 20, it says, "Our father worshiped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship." So where the well is at, where that mountain is at, where the well's at, is known for worship. And so that's when Jesus gets into about the worshiping. And so there, when I was doing research on that as well, it was saying that water as well was representing worship to God, worship to Jesus. And it would have been, when I read the Samaritan story, it actually reminds me a little bit of the other story, the lady with the perfume. I don't know why it reminds me of that so much, but I think about how when she came to the feet of Jesus and she poured that perfume over his feet, and it's like the Samaritan woman, she's at the well, she's getting water, but here she is having an encounter with Jesus. And even though she didn't go to his feet, but in both stories we can see there was like a sign of like worship there. because after when the Samaritan woman actually realized the identity of Jesus, and she was like, wow, he's the Messiah and stuff, after he had told her, there we see where now there had to be some type of worship, because there had to be an honoring. Okay, worship is honoring, and so she honored him in that moment. And so that's where we see where the well and the water kind of represents too, where it was a time of where she was honoring Jesus. I do want to speak about when he spoke about the 5 husbands. I was doing a little research on that one as well, because I wanted to explain it very clearly. I didn't want to explain it like my own understanding, but a lot of people would think, oh well, she was probably in sin, just because you hear 5 husbands, people would think that. But if we think about in the culture time, I don't think at that time a woman is able to have many husbands. We hear about husbands having many wives, but we don't really hear as much that women's having many husbands. So I don't know if that was really acceptable at that time in the culture. When we read the timing of in the Bible of that timing, so I don't really know. But I do know that when I was doing some research on it, they were saying it could have been a symbolic of her life, things of her past and the way how she was living as well. And maybe she wasn't having 5 husbands, but maybe she was in one relationship and maybe another. And that's where we go back to the satisfies, not being satisfied, looking for needs, seeking, feeling hopeless, not finding what we're constantly looking for. And that's how we are, when we don't come to God. That's how we are when we're a part of the world. We're constantly seeking and looking for something that never satisfies us. And I had heard a testimony from a man who says, it was a testimony, it was like a rich man, and he had a lot of money, and he had everything he needed. He had all the wealth, and he had everything, basically everything that he needed. But inside, he was still miserable. He still wasn't satisfied until when he came to Christ. Everything in his life changed from that time on. And so it just shows how we're never satisfied in this world. But when you come to God, He can fulfill all those needs. He can provide all the things that you never even expected, and a lot more abundance than what you were thinking. And so when we see here, maybe that could have been happening in the Samaritan woman's life. We don't really know much about her past. We don't really know much about her life. We just know that just like that short little clip right there of just, when Jesus told her, well, you had 5 husbands, the one you have now is not yours, It could have been a symbolic. It also could have represented something that was happening in her life as well. And, and then when we talk about the thirst, the last symbolism that I wanted to point out is the thirst. And when we talk about the thirst, and it ties up with everything that I have been saying, is how the soul, we're never satisfied and we're always looking. But when we read in the book,